Good Monday morning, everybody. I am Angie Callan, and this is No More Mondays, the podcast where we believe you can have a thriving career or business and an amazing life on your terms. And every week, I get to talk to incredible people who are walking that walk and are sharing their stories and resources to help you live and work authentically. Today's lineup, it was one for the record books as I welcome Damon Lembi to the show. Damon is the CEO of Learnit, and he's also a leadership speaker, a former D1 baseball player, and somebody who's passionate about helping people become better leaders, not just act like them. I love how Damon puts it. Great leaders are born and they're not made either. Wait a minute. Got to get the quote right, y'all. This is a live show. Sometimes I actually make mistakes. Great leaders aren't born and they're not made. They're in the making, constantly learning, evolving, and taking swings even when the odds are tough. And today we're going to talk about that real path to leadership. From baseball lessons, and you all love how much I love a good sports analogy, to business wins, Damon and I are going to help you stay in the game when self-doubt creeps in, all while cultivating a learn it all mindset that'll help you navigate this rapidly changing world we live in. Damon, welcome to No More Mondays.
Angie, it's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad you like sports analogies because I got a lot of them if you like those kind of things.
Are we going to have a sports analogy off today? Because I think that could just be the whole episode.
Well, we already discussed, we're having a book off already.
We're having a
bookshelf. Bookshelf off, yeah.
Bookshelf off. I feel like I'm already seeing colors there that I'm like, yeah, I have that book, have that book, have that book. So somebody out there start tallying the sports analogies. But before we get there, let's take a step back and talk about this kind of leadership in the making piece and how you talk about leadership is something that we grow into versus necessarily just coming out that way. Talk to me a little bit more about that and kind of what that all means to you.
So without a doubt, some people are born with some innate skills. Maybe they're charismatic or they're outgoing, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, I truly believe all of us have the opportunity to be leaders. And to do so, it's a constant learning, growing, and evolving. So as you said it earlier, very well said, great leaders aren't born or made, they're always in the making. And I think that's really important because if we feel like we've hit the peak and we know it all, I think especially in these days, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to think about, you said something that is, I want to dig into a little bit, and that's that there are people who have natural leadership tendencies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the full leader they could be, or that they never even need to grow into it, sounds like.
Absolutely. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're even going to be great leaders. Great leaders, in my opinion, are people who are people first leaders. Leadership shouldn't be about yourself, even though we all start with self-leadership. It should be about the people that you lead. And I've found that as you get more senior in your leadership journey, that's when you need to continue to keep growing and learning more, because it's easy to say, hey, I've already accomplished all this. I'm happy with what I've done, but there's always more to learn. Things are always changing and evolving. And if you want to stay at the top of your game, you need to continue to do so yourself.
And I also think once you get further up the proverbial ladder, and I think that's whether you are leading within a company owned by others or leading in your own company, as you get more senior, the leadership challenges become more multifaceted and complex. And so you almost need to continue exercising that muscle.
You do. And if you're leading a small team, a large team, or your own business, I believe that you need to model the behavior that you want everybody else in your organization to be like. And so if you want an organization that's open to change, that doesn't say the proverbial, this is how we've always done it, because you're always curious and looking to do things differently, you need to, be out on the front of that charge and be learning and growing yourself.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sorry to single any of you out there, but it is amazing how much a single leader at the very top of an organization or an organizational structure and unit can influence and impact culture.
100%. I like to say, Angie, that, culture, starts with the senior executives, especially the CEO. A lot of these organizations, we have your core values and they're up on the wall, and most people don't live them or even know what they are. But
No.
I find that the best leaders are living those core values, whether it's integrity or it's embracing change or lifelong learning, whatever it is they are. They're modeling that behavior, and it has a gigantic impact. On the flip side, I'm thinking of an organization where it's a 1,000-person company, and it's a yes man organization where it's the culture is all, if you don't agree with the CEO, if you have different perspectives, it's not really welcome there. And so everybody kind of puts their head down and they just focus and they do their work, and they don't want to get called out. And so that's an example of a culture where people aren't taking a lot of chances, and they're not really evolving either.
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about in any societal examples of that right now, Damon. Moving on, we talked about kind of working this muscle and some of the exercises or reps that we can all take to become great leaders. What are some of those things that we need to practice so that we can preach it?
I would say one of the first things that we should all practice as a leader is learning how to become a better listener, which is very, very difficult, if you ask me. And so to be a better listener, I'm talking about being present, focusing, not being distracted by your phone or your email. And because again, people who are, I think, poor leaders, a lot of the times they'll have one-on-ones that they'll cancel on somebody, but even if they're having a one-on-one, they're focused doing something else. And I don't think that people want to work for organizations where they don't feel like they're part of an organization and they can't even get the respect of the leader. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think that great leaders do is that they're constantly staying curious. They're constantly looking at, like, how can we do things differently? How can we serve our customers differently or better? What did I do last time that we can try to upgrade what we're doing? That's another one. And a third one, which is super important, is feedback. A lot of people talk about giving feedback. Let me teach you. You go on Amazon, there's probably 1,000 books on giving feedback. I think the real superpower is if you're great at being able to receive feedback. If you're open enough where somebody can come to you, a direct report or a peer or somebody, and then you can receive that feedback without getting defensive. Because being able to receive feedback, I think, is really like the fuel for growth. It's a great learning opportunities.
Key phrase in there: receive feedback well. Receive feedback with grace. Receive feedback without defensiveness is key. And I'm reminded of, I'll give a shout out to my own podcast. There's an episode with Carrie Siggins who talks a lot about the owner's mindset. She's the CEO of an ESOP, and so there is quite literally an owner's mindset throughout the company. And she talks a lot about this idea of like feedback, having an open door where even the intern has access, and there's an established approachability to provide feedback all the way up the food chain. And that kind of buy-in really changes the makeup of a team. So there's a deep dive if you want to go back and find Carrie Siggins' episode, everybody out there. It goes further into this. But that's one piece of, I want to kind of reiterate this like trifecta you mentioned, which is listening to hear and not be heard. Huge difference. Innovation and being open to feedback. And to me, I think that all wraps into the values piece you brought up into like this level of intentionality in our leadership, right? If you're going to have values as a company, be intentional about them and don't just have them as marketing on a website, because that's what most places do. Are they actually lived? And are you intentional in how you show up, how you hear your people, how you are open to the feedback they give you, because that will actually help you innovate. And all of that leads to this really incredible culture that is a place people want to work, or at least it sounds like that's what this could create. Right, Damon?
Absolutely. I think you distilled it really nice when you said it's all about intentionality. And one thing I want to add in there is that as a leader, you're always on stage. So people are always looking at your body movements, how you're behaving. So that's something that you also should be very intentional about, that you're on stage at all times. So, however you want to be perceived, that's what people are seeing.
So this is a great time to talk a little bit about Learnit. So here comes Damon's shameless plug a little bit. But a lot of what we're talking about is being present, open to feedback, and intentionality, and this idea of learn it all versus know it all. Which, I mean, we've all worked for that autocratic, don't say boo to me, know it all. And this is really leaning into that idea of curiosity that you brought up. So talk to me a little bit more about the learn it all mindset and how that concept came to be.
Well, you stole my skit that I always say is to start with a know-it-all, right? And then we all know it's somebody who's a know-it-all, where you have a conversation with them, they kind of roll their eyes back, and they're already thinking about how they're going to respond. They're not hearing you. On the flip side is you have the learn-it-all. Somebody, I really think that the traits of a learn-it-all leader, and by the way, we're all leaders in our own sense.
Yes.
Whether you're a parent, whether you're a coach, whether you're just leading yourself. So we're all leaders in my mind. And those traits I think are really important is humility. It's okay. Look, you don't have to have all the answers, so to say, hey, I don't know. Integrity, you kind of think that maybe you wouldn't have to tell people that, but it's true. Say what you're going to do what you're going to say, show up on time, do what's right, whenever, not just when it's convenient to you, but all the time. Have that ownership mindset. Nothing drives me nuts more than a victim mindset. We talked a little bit about that. Having the courage to make bold decisions. Things are hard sometimes, and you have to make tough choices, tough decisions, and stick your neck out there sometime. And finally, we mentioned it before, you call it innovation. I like to call it curiosity. It's like thinking and seeing how things can be done differently.
I'm going to bring in the word vulnerability as a leadership superpower. Humility is vulnerability and humility combined. The idea of being willing to fail. There's something that we are like terrified of in society today. Or saying, I don't know, but I'll find out, are all things that are more learn it all than know it all, and lead to a little bit of vulnerability that makes you human. And I don't know about you, but I would like to work with and for other humans.
Beyond right. I mean, I don't even know that's a term, beyond right, but absolutely. People want to work with authentic, genuine people. And, you say vulnerability and humility. I like to add vulnerability with confidence, because I think that exactly like you said, look, I don't have all the answers, but we're going to figure it out. That's confidence. People don't want to work for somebody who, like that crying CEO who came on one time, after he let go a bunch of people and he started crying and got slammed on social media because he made it all about himself. And that's also can be weakness. People want to they want to work for somebody who says, look, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to tap into my resources, to my team, and we're going to figure this out, and we're going to figure it out together. So it's a fine line with vulnerability. But if you could do vulnerability with confidence, you're going to be that authentic, genuine leader that people do want to follow.
And I'll tell you, I'm going to give you here's a story. It's not a sports anecdote, but I'll tell a quick story that's a more from a client lens than a team lens, but it's related. And I think it goes into that fear of vulnerability that we have sometimes as business owners when we're kind of trying to lead our own space or our own client engagements of wanting to be everything. I had a client who had come back to me for a second engagement and needed something that I didn't feel equipped to give. And it was a hard emotional situation. And I said to the client, I am not your person right now, but I am going to give you resources to find the person who is. And what is so amazing that 2 weeks later, after saying essentially, no, I can't take you on as a client, it was a no, but I was confidently vulnerable. I was like, I am not your person. Here's who is. That client came back to me and was so grateful and thankful of how much care and how much human I gave her in giving her resources, even though I wasn't the person. And so you really can create an interesting dynamic and relationships with people by telling them what they need to know instead of what you think they want to hear. And that happens at all angles, right? Leaders placating teams, but not being able to deliver, teams placating leaders and saying, sure, we can meet that deadline, and setting unrealistic expectations. I love the idea of confident vulnerability.
I mean, how did you feel going into that conversation? Were you nervous that you you were going to be looked at as an imposter, or, with this woman?
It was more about feeling bad or feeling guilty of having to tell someone no. But what I have found is if you can say, no, here's a solution, it becomes a lot easier to say, that's more about yes, not me, than no. And that makes it easier if you're able to have those resources. And that to me goes into that learn it all versus know it all, is like, hey, I don't know it all. I'm not your person, but let's learn together who the right person is. But on the front end, it felt hurtful to have to tell somebody I can't help you, but it turns out it was done in a way that was well received. And so the message there is you can do that.
I think it's interesting that you say it's hurtful. I'm a big believer in exactly what you said. And I tell this to our sales team, and we have 8 or 9 sales reps. If you sit down with a prospect and you uncover what their challenges are or their goals, and you're not a right fit, just be transparent. Hey, we're not a right fit for this. Let me connect you with somebody who is, because then you're putting on you're a connector. I had a great guy on my show, Brent Adamson, who originally was one of the co-writers of the book, The Challenger Sale. But he's saying, in my episode, he said, look, you want to be a connector. And if you do that, they're going to come back to you, and they're also going to refer other people to you because they trust you instead of you just trying to shove your product down their throat.
KLT, know, like, and trust. You can tell someone no and maintain and create more trust than if you had said yes and under-delivered.
100%.
How incredible is that?
I mean, I think one of the things that drive me nuts and the worst thing you could do is overpromise and underdeliver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is, I mean, do you want to tank your brand faster than ever? And, maybe this is a good point to ask as a leader. How can leaders kind of stop doing that? Right. I find that something gets in the way of them, and maybe it's a know-it-all, learn-it-all kind of mentality, but there's something in the way of them being more comfortable with this kind of like vulnerability, build trust. Maybe they're not as open and coachable as they need to. What's getting in the way there?
My first piece of this is, if you first think about what you're going to do. And if it's something that you think would take you, let's say, a week to get done or 2 weeks, build in a little buffer time. Instead of just jumping to, hey, I want to serve this person, I want to help this person. So I think that's sometimes it's making a decision or saying yes to something without really thinking through what the outcome could look like. And I always call it like your customer success team's in a bunker, and the sales rep just throws like a grenade over the bunker, right? And says, explodes, and you're like, try to figure this one out. So I think it's, again, going back to your word, being intentional and understanding if it's really something that you can deliver on. And if it is, build in that, that time in between, that so that you can have, if things don't go exactly as planned, you have that buffer time to be able to meet those expectations. And a lot of people, last thing I'll say about it, Angie, a lot of people, they don't need you to exceed their expectations. They just want you to do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, because you'd be surprised how many people don't even just do that.
Absolutely. All you got is show up. I mean, just show up and do what you say you're going to do. Sometimes it's not that, and show up on time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Being on time is like a differentiator skill nowadays, but that's another topic. You said something that I wanted to respond to, and my train of thought has left me. So maybe we'll come back to it, but we'll see. Because my mind is still lingering on that little term that you mentioned a few minutes ago when I was storytelling, which is imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. It is a hot topic in my world. And I know you mentioned it in your work. So I want to know where you see it show up in the leadership space.
I wrote a book called The Learn It All Leader. Almost forgot for a second there. And I talk a lot about the imposter syndrome because I originally dealt with it in sports when I got to Pepperdine. I was a high school All-American. I got to Pepperdine, and everybody's as good as me. And I'm like, I don't even know if I belong here. So that's when I first started dealing with it. Look, everybody has imposter syndrome, I believe. And if you say you don't, you're either a sociopath or maybe you're just not being honest with yourself. I see it showing up a lot especially in new leaders. So somebody
Mhm.
who takes on their first time leadership role and they're thinking to themselves, are these people, even going to listen to me? Am I even qualified to lead them? And my first thing I say to you is look, the people who put you in this position, they did so for a reason because they believe in you. So you need to believe in yourself. And I have a little framework I use, I can share or not share, on overcoming imposter syndrome. But most importantly, it's if somebody puts you in that position, they believe in you, so you are capable of doing the job.
It's fact. You have to go fact finding with imposter syndrome to prove the picture, the false picture in your mind, as false as it actually is. And I don't statistic. I've talked a lot about imposter syndrome, and I find it really interesting. I agree that pretty much everyone has it, whether that's what you call it or not. I was actually in a group coaching session the other day, and somebody was like, "Well, I don't actually think it's imposter syndrome," and I was like, "Oh," and by the end of it, she was like, "Oh, it is imposter syndrome. I just wasn't looking at it that way." And so it's really interesting to know why it's manifesting itself, because it plagues leaders and high achievers the most, because we fall into that like perfectionism trap so commonly, or the people pleasing trap, or all of the other forms of it. And so
Comparison. Yep.
you can't tease me with a framework and not give it to me.
Yeah. Well, so the framework that I always used is that I kind of developed on my own. And this is when, to make a very long story short, I kind of failed at Pepperdine, and then I got another shot to go play at Arizona State. And a lot of people said, well, don't do it because, you should just move on with your life and get your degree. And I said, forget it. This is my last shot to play at a Division I college. And so the first thing I taught myself is like, I got to label. Step one is label your fear. What am I really afraid of? I move into this leadership role and I fail at my job, or I don't make the baseball team. So is that something you could overcome? Yeah, you could overcome that. So you label your fear and say, okay, I can do this. Step number two is there's really no substitute for hard work. In baseball, I was the first guy in the field. I was the last one to leave. When it came to, let's say, being a podcast guest, I just went all in and I just did 100 of them, right? So because there's no substitute for hard work. Step three is, inside that hard work is deliberate practice, deliberate focus. It's easy to procrastinate and do other things, but if you really want to get better at something, work hard at it, but then really focus in. Baseball, I struggled with hitting curveballs. So I had the batting practice pitcher throw me 1,000 curveballs as a baseball analogy, right? And the same thing goes to if you're giving a speech and you're doing a transition, practice that over and over and over till you get better at it. And then the final step, whether you're stepping into a batter's box or you're stepping up on stage or you're having these team meetings, it's time to learn and let go. Stop thinking about your technique. Stop worrying about the results. Just have fun at it. Also, every time is going to be a learning opportunity for you. So you might knock it out of the park, you might strike out, but you can get feedback like we talked about, and you can learn, grow, and evolve. And the other thing I'd like to add to that is I think too many of us, I know, are so hard on ourselves. And so many people pass up opportunities because they're afraid to try. Just give yourself a pat on the back. Hey, look, I went for it. It turned out great, or it didn't turn out, right? So whatever, you can learn and you can get better. So that's really my 4 steps. Label your fear, work hard, deliberate practice, and learn to let go.
I love this because it all circled back to the idea of giving ourselves grace, which we are so, especially the women out there, we are so hard on ourselves. Our voice is typically the most negative, critical one that we hear, and we hear it more than anyone else's voice because it's our own. And so I really like this idea of label the fear and prove to yourself what's the worst case scenario, right? Is I go to Arizona State and I don't make it there, and then I finish out my college degree. Well, guess what? You won't ever have to wonder what would have happened if I'd have tried another school, right? You can always go back, you can always move forward, but there might be times when you can't necessarily try something again. And so if you can set aside that fear enough and take action, is the common theme I have heard from everyone who studies imposter syndrome. Is analysis paralysis is not going to knock that little devil off your shoulder. Only thing that's going to is action and a little bit of fearlessness around the whole failure thing.
Yeah, I wanted to double down on that and say, when you look back, you're going to worry less about the failures you had. You're going to worry or regret those less. You're going to regret the opportunities and chances you didn't take because you had your imposter syndrome or self-doubt or whatever it is. And, for somebody now in my 50s, you look back 20, 30 years ago and you say, like, man, I wish failure wouldn't have been too bad, So just learning how to get comfortable with failure is so important.
What's that book that you probably have on your shelf? The 7, is it the 5 or the 7 regrets of the dying? Anyway, spoiler alert, Cliff's Notes, whatever you want to call it. No one ever says, I shouldn't have tried the thing. Right? They just, or I should have worked more. Those are never anything that anyone says. And so to loop this kind of idea of, building confidence as a leader, overcoming imposter syndrome, let's say there's somebody out there right now listening who's that new leader you mentioned, who is just been promoted and trying to figure out what planet they landed on. What's some advice, or what are the first few things they can do to start getting a foothold?
I think that's a great question. I think the first thing you do as you come in as a new leader is don't try to change everything right off the bat to prove your worth. Sit down, talk to your team members, figure out what's working, what's not working, understanding where people are at, who are the people who have conflicts with each other. I think that's really important. I also think it's important as a new leader to go to your leader and ask to be, invest in your professional development. I think it's very, very, and I'm not, of course, that's what I do at Learnit, right? We do live learning classes. I'm not even referring to Learnit, whether it's coaching, whether it's whatever it is, have your company invest in you, because when you move into a leadership role, there's a lot of skills that you may not have. And it's going to be hard to figure out on your own. And then go out and figure out who your mentors can be. You can, whether through your friends or your network, or maybe it's even somebody in your organization, say you're in a larger organization and they're a leader you aspire to be like, go get a coffee with them. But find mentors, ask questions, and just keep in mind, like we mentioned before, that you do belong in the role that you're at. And by the way, nothing is going to go perfect or linear.
Yes.
You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Just try not to make the same mistake over and over. Learn from those mistakes, try things differently, ask for feedback, and just understand it's a journey with no finish point. I mean, I'm doing this 30 years and I look back at things I did even 10 years ago and man, why did I make that mistake? But at least I didn't make the same mistake again. I try to learn and make different mistakes, make new mistakes.
I love the perfect part was what I was thinking is you aren't going to know it all going into a new organization, even if you have made a lateral move from the same level of leadership at the same type of company. There is one big variable that is different, and that's the people. And what I love about those suggestions on what a new leader can do is every single one of them involved people. Get to know your people, develop your own people, i.e. yourself, get mentors, talk to the people above you. Don't isolate yourself, because leadership can sometimes be lonely. I know this even in, leading my own business. Sometimes it feels lonely, but if you can lean into the people around you and surround yourself with support of varying types, it makes a ton of difference. And then if you layer on this idea of, I don't know it all, I'm going to try some things, I'm not going to get it right, you've just alleviated a whole lot of pressure that I think we're really good on putting ourselves when we step into those situations. And that's what then makes us feel like, why did I get this job? I can't do it. Nobody expected you to be perfect in that job ever, except for maybe yourself.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how hard we are on ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. We would never talk to ourselves. We never talk to others the way we talk to ourselves. And one other point I want to make, especially for small business owners or CEOs, that can be very lonely, because sometimes who are you going to turn to? You can't turn to your direct reports and say, man, I don't, and just be like completely frustrated. That's why it's great to go out and and sometimes you can't even talk to your partner, your wife or your husband or whatever about things like that. Maybe they don't want to hear it or whatnot. That's why it's so important to reach out to an executive coach or join a mastermind or something, people who have likewise or similar types of experiences, where they can share that in a room of confidence, where you have some psychological safety, where you can share those thoughts and get them off your chest, because I think you'll feel much better. And what you will find out is that you're not alone, and people across the board are probably having very similar situations that you can have conversations with them about.
Misery really does love some company. And I say it all the time, business and leadership are better shared. We are pack people. We're not meant to do this kind of stuff alone. And so if you can find those people to surround yourself with, the misery will love a little bit of company. It's kind of a negative way to put it, but it can really support you through challenging times, because ultimately leadership is about showing up, being curious and learning consistently, embracing that long game that is a journey, which is such a great word. It's about a learn it all mindset and not a know it all mindset. And so I kind of want to pose you with a little bit of like a loaded question as we start to wrap up.
Well, I just want to say you said that very well. I'm going to have to steal some of those for
You can have
my
it.
own approach when talking about it. I will.
Okay, cool. Yay! I had a mic drop moment. Write that down, Damon. Write that down.
Yeah.
If somebody out there wants to grow into leadership, but they don't feel like that natural, or they have the imposter syndrome going on, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, we could all continue to learn and grow, and we could all be leaders. What you need to do is you need to take action. Find a way, find somewhere to become a leader, whether that's in your organization or outside your organization, and just take that first step. Because without, again, it's better done than perfect. You don't need to be perfect in anything, but just find an opportunity, even if it's in a volunteer role or something where you get to help lead people, just go out there and do it. And the more practice, the better you'll get at it. I mean, confidence comes through reps. It doesn't come from sitting back and thinking about how things could be. It comes through sticking your neck out there and trying things.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So, in all of your great wisdom about learning it all and not knowing it all, where do people lean in and find more about you and the work that you're doing in this space?
Well, one thing I want to say before I do that is learning without doing is treason. So it's one thing, because people are saying, oh, we learn it all. Or you just talk about learn all the time. No, you got to actually put some things into action, and you have to apply what you're doing. So I think that's one thing I'd like to clarify. If you want to connect with me, do so on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Damon Lembi. And I also have the Learn It All podcast that Angie's coming on, which I have a great time getting to meet great leaders of across the board and learning from them. So LinkedIn, Learn It All podcast, and of course my company, Learnit.com.
I love the learning it is one thing, doing it, applying it is another. Just learn it and do it is not as sexy of a business name. So you're going to get it all when you follow along this guy, because we're connected on LinkedIn. So if you're listening out in podcast land, instead of on LinkedIn, head on over to my profile, and you can find Damon and learn about all of the things he's doing at Learn It and Do It.
Learn it and do it. Okay.
I have to point out to everybody, we did this entire episode without a single baseball or sports analogy.
I know. How did that happen?
I don't know, but I think we hit a home run.
Oh, there you go. There's the one.
See what I did there?
You teed me up for that one.
I did. We have to have a little fun around here. And I hope all of you out there listening enjoyed this episode and agree that it's a home run. Leave us a rating if you're listening to podcast land. And in the meantime, my challenge to you for the next week is to ask you where there is one place where you can become a better leader, whether it's a tough conversation, whether it's the voice that you lead with yourself, a curious conversation, or stepping up when it feels uncomfortable. I want you to take a step towards doing while learning. I'll see you next week for another episode of No More Mondays.